Hello and welcome. I'm Exolite and this is my channel. Since Unsolved Mysteries is having a sort of popularity reboot on Netflix, I decided that I would look at 3 older cases that are still open and see if we can find anybody who knows anything about these cases while we're at it. If you would please give this video a thumbs up, I'd appreciate it. If you would share my videos, I'd appreciate it. If you are not subscribed, go right ahead. And if you'd like to be notified when my content goes live, go ahead and click that bell. Alright, let's begin with our first case, shall we? At 10:40 a.m. on April 29th, 1986, a farmer in rural Oklahoma noticed smoke coming from a nearby road. He called the police. 20 minutes later, the Oklahoma State Highway Patrol arrived at the scene, and what they found there was a burning car that apparently had crashed into the bridge, and the heat from this fire was so intense that the car had actually melted into the bridge's metal guardrail. There was a body found inside. By the time the fire was extinguished, the body was burned beyond recognition. Skid marks indicated that the car's speed at impact were between 50 to 60 miles per hour. The car belonged to a man whose name was Pat Conway, and the body was soon identified as Eileen, his wife of 33 years. They lived with their children in Lawton, 15 miles from the crash site. As a side note, I used to live 15 miles from Lawton. Authorities believed that she died in a tragic accident, but Pat found convincing evidence that she was, in fact, murdered. On the day of Eileen's death, Pat returned home and he had found several things out of place. The screen door in the back was left open. Her purse was left behind, with her driver's license and her glasses, and there was an iron left on. There was a garden hose filling up the pool, and in the bathroom, the tub was full of water, and the phone was left off the hook. Pat believed that she may have been trying to call for help. Also, Pat found that the road on which Eileen died was unfamiliar to her. Neither of them had ever been there before her death. He contacted investigator Ray Anderson, and the next day they went to the crash site. They found a church bulletin laying on the ground, 200 feet from the bridge. Pat identified it as coming from their church. He had last seen it on the car's dashboard. He did not believe that it would have flown out of the window, as Eileen always drove with the windows closed and the air conditioning on. Anderson believed that someone was in the car with Eileen, and that person opened the door, set the accelerator, slammed it into drive, hoping to send the car into the creek and making it look like an accident. As a result of Anderson's investigation, the DA had the cause of death changed from accident to unexplained. The DA asked the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation and the state fire marshal to investigate the possibility of arson. Sonny Samson of the fire marshal's office was surprised at how the fire caused such great damage to the car's interior. He believed that it was similar to what would occur if gasoline was set on fire. He also noted that the gas cap from the car was missing. According to him, in most arson cases, it is removed to help increase the spread of fire. Informal burn tests on a dashboard and upholstery samples from a car similar to Eileen's suggested that the inside of hers may have been doused with gasoline. According to Samson, the type of damage to it would not have been found if it were an accident. To this day, nobody knows why Eileen died. There were suspects. Authorities believe that Eileen's death may have been connected to several burglaries in her neighborhood. They suspect that the burglars planned to hit her home, assuming that she wasn't there. They believe that when she walked in on them, they abducted and killed her. According to some sources, jewelry was missing from the home, which supports the burglary theory. Sadly, Pat died on August 20th, 2013, without ever learning the true circumstances beyond his beloved wife's death. A reward is being offered still for information leading to the conviction of someone in this case. There has been some speculation that Eileen may have suffered from a serious medical emergency or brain ailment that caused her to leave her home and crash her car. However, this has not been confirmed. Our second case is about Arnold, Archambault, and Rubian Bruggier. It happened on December 12th, 1992. Arnold Archambault, who was 20 years old, and Ruby Bruggier, who was 19, were a Yankton Sioux couple who had started dating in high school in 1991. They became parents of an infant daughter. On December 11th, 1992, the couple, along with Ruby's 17-year-old cousin, Tracy Dion, went on an all-night partying spree. Shortly before 6 a.m. on December 12th, the three arrived at Tracy's home, where they had left the child with Tracy's father. He advised them to come back later, since they had all been drinking. Within mere minutes, the three were involved in a horrible car accident in Lake Andes, South Dakota, where they lived. The driver was Arnold. Apparently, he suddenly steered the car into a frozen ditch. The cousins, Tracy and Ruby, were inside the overturned car, while Arnold was nowhere to be found. Ruby managed to escape, but she didn't help Tracy out of the car, for whatever reason. Luckily, paramedics arrived just a short time later and managed to pull Tracy out of the car and save her life. Police Deputy Bill Youngstrom conducted a search for Ruby and Arnold as soon as he arrived at the scene, but the two were nowhere to be found on the day of the accident. At first, Deputy Youngstrom believed that the couple had probably ran off intentionally because of the DWI laws. However, their families didn't believe that they would disappear voluntarily. Deputy Youngstrom spent several months searching for this couple to no avail. Then, in early March of 1993, a passing driver saw a decomposed body in the frozen ditch 75 feet from where Arnold's car had crashed months earlier. It was Ruby Bruggier's body. Ruby's glasses and shoes were nowhere to be found, but her clothes remained intact. The police pumped the ditch out, and at noon the next day, they found Arnold's body submerged in the water about 15 feet away from where Ruby was found. Arnold's body was, strangely, not as decomposed as Ruby's was. His skin color was fine. He was not frozen to the ground, and neither were his clothes. Deputy Youngstrom is not certain if the clothes found on his body were the ones that he was even wearing on the night of the accident. Police did not understand how both bodies were in two different stages of decomposition when it was assumed that they died at the same time. It was expected that Ruby and Arnold would have decomposed at the same rate. An autopsy later determined that both victims died from exposure. However, the time of death could not be determined. Investigators found other strange clues at the scene. A tuft of hair was found that was determined to belong to Ruby. Deputy Youngstrom does not believe that the hair could have stayed there for 3 months. A set of car keys were also found in Arnold's pocket. One of the keys was for a car, and 2 were for houses. Investigators could not determine where the keys came from. A witness claimed to have seen Arnold and 3 other people on New Year's Eve, almost 3 weeks after the accident. The witness even took a polygraph exam and passed, which indicated that she had not lied about seeing Arnold on New Year's Eve. Ruby's father, Quentin Bruggier, believed that his daughter and her boyfriend were victims of foul play and that the killer murdered them elsewhere and put the bodies back in the ditch to make it seem like they died there. But it is still unknown if the young lovers were victims of homicide or the accident. A $5,000 reward is offered in this case. There are no known suspects, although authorities have been unable to locate 2 men who were seen near the ditch just a few hours before the bodies were discovered. They were driving a dark, style Blazer vehicle. The FBI closed this case in 1999. They said they found no evidence of foul play and felt that the couple had died accidentally. However, some officers involved in the case, along with the victims' families, still believe that foul play was, in fact, involved. At the very least, they believe that the couple died elsewhere and the bodies were placed in the ditch. Ruby's father died on October 17th, 2001. Rachel Marie Runyon was born on June 23, 1979, in Weaver County, Utah. She was the second child and only daughter of Jeff and Elaine Runyon. She had an older brother, Justin, and a younger brother, Nathan. The family had moved to Sunset from Tennessee just before Rachel's birth. Her mother would later recall that she and her husband believed that Sunset, then a community of just 6,000 people, would be a wonderful and safe place to raise their children. Rachel was a child beauty queen, having been crowned Little Miss Sunset the year before her murder. She had been described by her mother as a well-behaved child who often was too young to participate in playground games with Justin and other children, but she was content to simply sit aside and suck her thumb, watching the other children play. This habit had led her mother to occasionally teasing Rachel that she would become buck-toothed as an adult, to which Rachel would simply giggle. Despite the sense of security that Jeff and Elaine Runyon felt within the community of Sunset, both parents repeatedly warned their children of the dangers of trusting anybody that they did not know who could attempt to lure them from their home or a safe environment. The family lived in a modest home adjacent to the Doxy Elementary School playground, a park the 3 children were fond of, in which they regularly played. Mitchell Park was also near their home. In the summer of 1982, Jeff and Elaine installed a gate in their backyard fence so the family could easily access the playground. In the late morning of August 26, 1982, Rachel Runyon and her 5-year-old brother Justin asked their mother if they and their younger brother Nathan, who was 18 months old, could play in the playground of Doxy Elementary School. Although Elaine Runyon had never allowed her children to play unsupervised anywhere else outside the family home, because she was preparing lunch for the children when they made the request, and the school playground was just 15 feet from her home, well within sight of her kitchen window, she agreed to it. I'm going to add to now, for those of you who have listened to my podcasts, that was not unusual. When I was 4 and 5 years old, I was taking my 2-year-old brother and playing in the woods behind our house, or even further, going down the street, riding our bikes on trails. So things have definitely changed a lot than back there. So please keep that in mind when you are listening to this story, it was not unusual to allow your children to go play outside. Nonetheless, Runyon repeatedly looked out of her kitchen window, and she even conversed with her children as she prepared their meal. When she called her children in at approximately 12:55 to eat lunch, only Nathan and Justin returned home. Justin blurted out that Rachel had been taken by force just moments before by a young man who had initially offered to buy her ice cream and bubble gum at a nearby supermarket. According to Justin, the man had approached them as they played in the sandpit, attempting to lure the siblings into his car with an offer to purchase candy for the trio. When they were close to the man's car, Rachel told him she liked bubblegum-flavored ice cream. The man claimed that was amazing because he had that flavor of ice cream in his car. Justin said he warned Rachel not to accompany the man any further, but she began to turn and walk away from him. In response, he simply walked over to Rachel, picked her up, placed her over his shoulder before bundling her, screaming, into his car as Justin stood frozen in fear, with Nathan standing by his side. Elaine rushed to the supermarket the kidnapper had mentioned, repeatedly asking staff and shoppers, "Have you seen a little blonde girl, a 3-year-old?" Nobody she encountered had seen her child. Approximately 20 minutes later, after her daughter's disappearance, Elaine reported Rachel's abduction to the Sunset Police Department. Immediately upon learning of Rachel's abduction, the Sunset Police Department set up roadblocks in and around the city. This tactic failed to help police approach the suspect or to recover Rachel. In the hours following her abduction, a task force consisted of 10 law enforcement investigators was formed to investigate the child's disappearance. These investigators were recruited from several Utah counties and supervised by Sheriff Brant Johnson. Both Justin Runyon and a 10-year-old child, who had also been approached by the man at the playground, described him to investigators as being a light-complexioned African American. He was between 30 and 35 years old and 6 feet tall, with a medium build and an Afro-style haircut with a handlebar mustache. He drove an older model 4-door, dark blue car with wood grain stripes along the sides. The man had been at Mitchell Park, talking to various children and drinking coffee for a minimum of 15 minutes before abducting Rachel. Investigators also discovered that this individual had played with the 3 Runyon children, reportedly Rachel's 5-year-old brother in particular, for several minutes before they accompanied him partway to his vehicle. Although other eyewitnesses' memories enabled the police to obtain an accurate physical description of the child's abductor, from which they were able to construct a detailed composite drawing, the only witnesses to Rachel's abduction had been the 3 children. There was no CCTV. There was nothing that was attached to the school that recorded her capture, her abduction. As such, beyond police and media appeals, subsequent law enforcement efforts were effectively limited to procedures like forensic searches of the crime scene and house-to-house inquiries in the hours and days after the event. Public appeals for information about Rachel's disappearance did lead investigators to receive multiple leads, both in relation to the whereabouts of the child and the possible identity of her abductor. Although all leads were vigorously pursued, they ultimately proved fruitless. Family efforts and media appeals, with assistance from an assembled neighborhood committee, many of whom donated money to an improvised family search effort, The Runyon family then began its own efforts to search for their daughter. Both the family and the neighborhood volunteers had limited methods for the search at their disposal. Although a nationwide distribution of flyers displayed Rachel's picture was organized with the assistance of friends and neighbors, the Runyon family's search through local neighborhoods and distributed thousands of missing person posters and flyers alerting to the public of Rachel's disappearance. Within 3 weeks, this initiative had cost the family $10,000 in postage expenses alone. 1 week after Rachel's abduction, her parents flew to New York to attend a press conference intended to maintain the extensive publicity surrounding their daughter's disappearance. At this press conference, Jeff Runyon said, "I feel the abductor is without conscience, and my plea is for someone who knows him to come forward and sell him out." Acknowledging the possibility that Rachel might have been sold following her abduction, Elaine Runyon urged all parents planning on adopting a little girl in the near future to please ensure that the child was not Rachel. On September 3rd, Rachel's parents appeared on the Today Show to continue to publicize Rachel's disappearance. They offered a $20,000 reward, raised in most part through a donation from concerned citizens in their own community. The city of Sunset also pledged an additional $20,000 for the child's safe return. At 5 p.m. on September 19th, a family traveling on a mountain road in Mountain Green, Utah, approximately 50 miles from Sunset, stopped their vehicles at a turnout close to Trappers Loop Road to let their children play at a nearby stream and throw rocks in the water. Close to a pile of brush, the children observed what they initially believed was a doll, partly covered in shrubbery, floating at the edge of the stream. Upon closer inspection, the children realized the doll was actually the nude body of a female toddler with her hands bound behind her back. Rachel's relatives were able to offer tentative identification of her body from a chipped tooth and piercings in her ears. Due to the advanced state of the body's decomposition, the precise cause of Rachel's death was never established. The coroner was unable to exclude smothering as the cause of death. Shortly after the formal identification of their daughter, Jeff and Elaine Runyon held Rachel's funeral service at the Sunset Stake Center. Over 300 mourners were in attendance, and Rachel was laid to rest in Washington Heights Memorial Park in the city of Ogden, Utah. She was buried in a white casket adorned with her photograph, a single pink rosebud, and one of her favorite Raggedy Ann dolls. Rachel's gravestone is inscribed with the words, "She brought a nation to its knees." The abduction and murder of Rachel Runyon proved to be a major factor in the October 1982 passage of a federal law allowing the parents of missing children access to a clearinghouse administered by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which would obtain and file records of the fingerprints and blood types of more than 300,000 Utah children. As a result of this abduction and murder, the state of Utah also formally implemented the Rachel Alert, a child abduction alert system, in April 2002. The Rachel Alert system was only used in the June 2002 abduction of Elizabeth Smart and the January 2003 abduction of 3-month-old Nicholas Triplett. Both children were ultimately found alive. In the wake of Elizabeth Smart's subsequent safe recovery, 41 states implemented the Amber Alert child abduction alert system. Utah replaced the Rachel Alert system with the Amber Alert system in April 2003, primarily to conform with the nationwide standards. The Amber Alert system is now tested twice a year in Utah on January 13th and on the anniversary of Rachel's abduction, August 26th. Rachel's murder was also a factor in passing of the Missing Children's Act, which places the descriptions of missing children in the FBI's National Crime Information Computer Database. Although Rachel's murder is still unsolved, Lieutenant Phil Olmsted, who first answered Elaine Runyon's frantic call for assistance following her daughter's abduction, continually assured the Runyon family of the Sunset Police Department's determination to find Rachel's murderer or murderers. Hopes for the identification of the perpetrator rest primarily on notable advances in forensic technology in the years since 1982. As a means to this end, investigators have not ruled out the possibility of exhuming Rachel's body to retrieve further forensic evidence. DNA testing conducted on items found near Rachel's body in 2007 yielded tentative results, although they have not helped advance the investigation. Rachel's family has never given up hope that her killer will be found. In 2012, investigators announced that a prison inmate in Pennsylvania who had been a resident of Sunset in 1982 was under active investigation. Although no formal charges have been filed against this individual, he is considered a possible suspect in Rachel's abduction and murder. Another potential is a man with a criminal record who is believed to live in New Mexico. Sunset Police Chief Ken Eborn has said that evidence supports the potential guilt of this suspect, but it is insufficient for police to make a formal arrest. Furthermore, Eborn said that he is convinced the witnesses or individuals with knowledge of the man's guilt are reluctant to come forward to authorities, possibly because of death threats that he has made against them. Though it has been 23 years since Rachel's abduction, we do not forget. We are still figuring out ways to find our missing children. The fight goes on. Elaine Runyon Simmons, mother of Rachel Runyon, reflecting on collective efforts to raise public awareness of child abduction and child safety in both Utah and nationwide. Following her daughter's abduction and murder, Elaine Runyon Simmons channeled her grief into action and became an outspoken advocate in national movement to raise awareness of issues regarding child safety, child abduction, and the legislated procedures regarding their recovery. Runyon Simmons has frequently offered emotional support, guidance, and advice to parents undergoing a similar experience to her family's ordeal. Regarding her ongoing commitment to the perpetuation and expansion of Utah's Rachel Alert child abduction alert system, which was assumed under the nationwide Amber Alert system, Runyon Simmons has said that being a voice in this field of advocacy is not a choice she would have made had Rachel had not been abducted and murdered. The events of August and September 1982 left her with little choice in this matter. In 2013, Runyon Simmons stated, "It's a legacy I leave for my daughter. If there is something in place like this, maybe we would still have had her." In May 2016, the park where Rachel was abducted was renamed Rachel Runyon Memorial Park. It was formally dedicated to Rachel's memory on August 26th. A memorial stone bearing an image of a little girl, a brief summary of her story, and the park's name stands within the grounds. The inscription on the stone reads, "In honor of Rachel Marie Runyon, June 23rd, 1979, August 26th, 1982, abducted from Doxy Elementary Playground, August 26th, 1982. The Rachel Runyon Missing and Exploited Children's Day was signed into legislation in Utah in March of 2017. The stated aim of this annual observance is to encourage individuals in Utah to prioritize child safety. The bill was inspired by Rachel Runyon and has been described as a catalyst for the development of better responses to child abduction within Utah. In instances where Amber Alert is implemented and the missing child is subsequently found safe and well, a Rachel Runyon Award is presented to the individual who either locates the missing child or initially alerted authorities to his or her abduction." Thank you for coming to my channel. Please share my videos. Please give this video a thumbs up. If you are not subscribed, please go ahead and do so. And also click that bell so you can be notified when my content goes live. Good night.